On March 14, 1987, Margaret Holloway walked into the Mercy General Hospital emergency room in Spokane, Washington, carrying something wrapped in a blood-stained pillowcase. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. When the nurse asked what was wrong, Margaret didn't speak. She simply placed the bundle on the counter and stepped back. The nurse unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a porcelain doll, approximately 16 inches tall, with painted blue eyes and real human hair. The doll's right hand was missing. Margaret whispered 4 words before collapsing: "It took my daughter." The police found 8-year-old Caroline Holloway 3 hours later, unconscious in the basement of their home on Riverside Avenue. She was alive, but she would never speak again. And when they checked her right hand, they found something the doctors couldn't explain. Something that would begin a chain of tragedies spanning 3 decades. The doll first appeared in documented records in 1982, at an estate sale in Portland, Oregon. The address was 1247 Hawthorne Boulevard. The estate belonged to Eleanor Vance, a woman who had lived alone for 43 years after her husband's disappearance in 1939. Eleanor died in her sleep, they said. Natural causes. But the neighbors remembered something else. They remembered the screaming that came from her house every night for the final month of her life. High-pitched screaming, like a child. But Eleanor had no children. When the estate sale began, most of the items sold quickly. Furniture, jewelry, photographs. But one item remained, sitting on a small wooden chair in the corner of the living room. The porcelain doll with the blue glass eyes and the auburn human hair. It wore a white Victorian dress with lace trim, now yellowed with age. Its lips were painted in a small, knowing smile. The tag read, $5. On the second day of the sale, a woman named Patricia Chen purchased the doll for her daughter's 6th birthday. Patricia later told investigators she felt compelled to buy it. Those were her exact words. Compelled. As if something was pulling her toward it. Her daughter, Amy Chen, loved the doll immediately. She named it Isabel. For 3 weeks, everything seemed normal. Then Amy's younger brother, 4-year-old David, fell down the stairs. He survived, but both his legs were shattered. He kept repeating the same thing to the paramedics, over and over: "Isabel pushed me. Isabel pushed me." The family dismissed it as trauma, confusion. But Patricia Chen began to notice other things. The doll would be in different rooms than where they'd left it. It would be facing different directions. And at night, she could hear something moving in Amy's bedroom. Soft footsteps. The creaking of floorboards. On October 17, 1982, Patricia Chen woke at 3:17 in the morning to the sound of her daughter screaming. When Patricia reached Amy's room, the door was locked from the inside. Amy was only 6 years old. She didn't know how to work the lock. Patricia's husband, Robert, broke down the door. Amy was standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, staring at the wall. The doll was sitting on her bed. But something had changed. The doll's smile seemed whiter. And in its lap was a small pile of auburn hair. Human hair. The same color as Amy's. When they turned Amy around, they saw that a section of her hair had been cut off, close to the scalp. Ragged, uneven, as if torn rather than cut. Amy wouldn't speak. Wouldn't respond to her name. Her eyes were open, but she seemed to be looking at something beyond the room, beyond her parents, beyond anything visible. The doctors called it catatonia brought on by severe psychological trauma. But they couldn't explain what had caused it. Patricia threw the doll away that night. She drove it 15 miles to a commercial dumpster behind a shopping center and buried it deep beneath bags of garbage. She came home and locked every door, checked every window. But at 3:17 the next morning, she heard it. A sound coming from Amy's room. Footsteps. She opened the door slowly, knowing what she would find but praying she was wrong. The doll was back. Sitting in the same position on Amy's bed. The smile impossibly wider. And this time, the doll's hand was resting on something. A Polaroid photograph. Patricia picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture of her sleeping. Taken from the foot of her bed. Taken that very night. Within a week, the Chen family donated the doll to a Goodwill in Seattle. They never told anyone what had happened. They moved to California and never spoke of it again. Amy Chen remained in a catatonic state for 7 months before she finally recovered. But she had no memory of those 3 weeks. No memory of the doll. Just nightmares about something watching her from the corner of her room. The doll changed hands 6 more times between 1982 and 1987. Each time, the same pattern emerged. A family would acquire it. Strange events would begin within days. Objects moving. Sounds at night. Children acting strangely, speaking in voices that weren't their own. And then something terrible would happen. Someone would be injured. Someone would disappear. Someone would lose their mind. In 1984, the doll was purchased by Daniel Reeves, a 42-year-old accountant in Tacoma. He bought it for his wife, Susan, who collected antique dolls. Susan placed it in their guest bedroom, in a glass cabinet with 17 other dolls from her collection. That night, Daniel woke to the sound of breaking glass. Every doll in the cabinet had been destroyed. Shattered porcelain, torn fabric, pulled apart limbs scattered across the floor. Every doll except one. Isabel sat untouched in the center of the cabinet, that same knowing smile on her painted lips. Susan Reeves became obsessed with the doll. She would spend hours alone in the guest room, talking to it, brushing its hair, changing its clothes. Her husband begged her to get rid of it. She refused. She began sleeping in the guest room. She stopped eating. Lost 23 pounds in 5 weeks. Her skin became pale, translucent. Her eyes developed dark circles that made her look decades older. On February 9, 1985, Daniel Reeves came home from work and found his wife standing in the backyard with a shovel. She had dug a hole approximately 6 feet deep. When he asked what she was doing, Susan turned to him with vacant eyes and said, "Isabel needs a place to keep her children." The hole was filled with small bones. Animal bones, the police later determined. Cats, dogs, raccoons. All arranged in careful patterns. Susan Reeves spent 8 months in a psychiatric facility. The doll disappeared from evidence storage 3 weeks after her admission. No one could explain how. The storage room was locked. There were cameras. But the footage from that night showed only static. By 1987, when Margaret Holloway brought the doll to Mercy General Hospital, a detective named Raymond Cross had begun to notice something. He was investigating Caroline Holloway's case, and during his research, he found references to similar incidents. Children falling into unexplained catatonic states. Families reporting antique dolls that moved on their own. Strange injuries, psychological breaks, disappearances. All in the Pacific Northwest. All within 5 years. All connected to estate sales, antique shops, second-hand stores. Detective Cross requested files from police departments across Washington and Oregon. What he found disturbed him deeply. 12 separate incidents, all involving families who had acquired an antique porcelain doll matching the same description. Auburn hair. Blue glass eyes. White Victorian dress. Knowing smile. But here was the impossible part. The doll in each case was identified as the same doll. Not similar. The same. Down to a specific chip on the left cheek, a small crack in the porcelain near the right ear. Detective Cross obtained photographs from evidence lockers, from family albums, from police reports. He laid them out on his desk in chronological order. His hands started shaking. In every photograph, the doll's expression was slightly different. The angle of the head. The position of the arms. The width of that terrible smile. As if it was posing differently each time it was photographed. As if it knew it was being documented. Detective Cross tracked the doll's movements like a predator tracking prey. Portland to Seattle. Seattle to Tacoma. Tacoma to Spokane. Always moving. Always finding new families. And then he found something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Eleanor Vance, the original owner from the 1982 estate sale, had purchased the doll herself in 1939. Purchased it from another estate sale. The estate of a family named Whitmore, who had all died in a house fire. All except their daughter, who was found 3 days later, wandering in the woods 12 miles away. She was 7 years old. She was clutching a porcelain doll. And she was smiling. Detective Raymond Cross compiled his findings into a 43-page report. He submitted it to his superiors on June 2, 1987. He requested permission to open a formal investigation into what he called a connected series of unexplained traumatic events potentially linked to a single object. His request was denied. His captain called him into the office and told him, kindly but firmly, that he needed to take some time off. That he was seeing patterns where none existed. That stress was affecting his judgment. Detective Cross took the time off. He spent it researching. He found records going back further. 1921, 1903. 1887, different names, different cities, but always the same doll. Always the same tragedies. He found a newspaper article from 1893 in a Boston archive. A small piece, barely 3 paragraphs, about a dollmaker named Isabel Thorne who died in suspicious circumstances. She had no family, no children. But witnesses reported seeing a small girl at her funeral. A girl no one recognized. A girl who placed a single porcelain doll on the coffin before disappearing into the crowd. Detective Cross tried to warn people. He contacted families who had purchased antique dolls. He visited estate sales and antique shops, asking if they had seen a doll matching the description. Most people dismissed him as disturbed, obsessed. But a few listened. A few took their dolls and burned them, just to be safe. On August 15, 1987, Raymond Cross was found dead in his apartment. The official cause of death was suicide. A single gunshot wound. But his partner, Detective Lisa Morrison, noted something strange in her unofficial report. Raymond's gun was found in his right hand. Raymond Cross was left-handed. And sitting on his kitchen table, carefully positioned to face his body, was a porcelain doll. Auburn hair. Blue glass eyes. White Victorian dress. Smiling. The doll was tagged as evidence and placed in storage. It disappeared 3 days later. The storage room was locked. The cameras showed nothing but static. The doll's current location is unknown. The last confirmed sighting was in 2019, at an estate sale in Vancouver, British Columbia. A young couple purchased it for their daughter's nursery. They posted a photograph on social media, proud of their vintage find. The post has since been deleted. The family's accounts have gone silent. But if you search carefully, if you look at archived versions of that photograph, you can see something in the background. Reflected in the nursery window. A face. Small. Pale. Smiling. And if you're very unlucky, if you're browsing estate sales or antique shops, you might see her too. 16 inches tall. Auburn hair. Blue glass eyes. Waiting. Always waiting. For the next family.